So I have kept this diagnosis to myself for a while and I've kept it bottled in. And I think that the longer that I've kept it bottled in is the more that I've experienced isolation. And as a lot of us know, isolation combined with mental illness is a perfect storm for thoughts of unaliving yourself, which I've struggled with on and off my entire life. And I'm tired of living in isolation. And I know that I'm not alone. And I'm so tired of people acting like mental illness is something that people bring on themselves or just a mindset. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that you can do to help your mindset, because I do believe sometimes I unintentionally keep myself in bad mental headspaces, but it's real. I know it's real. I know I'm not making it up in my head, and I know I'm not the only one. Um, so, my diagnosis story. So, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder in 2021. It changed my life, and I'll get to that. But I guess just talking about life before my diagnosis, did I know that I had something that serious going on? Were there any signs? All of that. So I'll just kind of start back to my childhood. I had a very rough childhood. It was traumatic. I saw things I shouldn't have seen. I was in many ways neglected, and I did not receive the love and attention and support and safety from my parents that I should have received. And I think when we talk about, was it the environment or was it hereditary or genetic or was I born with it? I think honestly it was a combination of all of the above. I think my environment and my upbringing didn't help. But I remember as a kid, I was angry all the time. I had episodes of rage. I had really bad temper tantrums. And you could say it's because I was struggling and I was just acting out as a kid. And I would agree with that. And I was just taking it out on the people around me. And I was matching their energy in a way. I don't want to name names, but there were people in my life who were verbally and emotionally abusive. And so I gave it back. I got angry. I fought back. I was not, fight, flight, or freeze. I was not a freeze person. I'm going to fight. And that's how I was growing up as a kid. And then as a teenager, I struggled with depression. I ended up seeing my doctor, my primary care physician, when I was about 15. And that was the first time I was put on antidepressants. At that time, I was struggling with suicidal thoughts. I would lay in bed all weekend. I would sleep all weekend. I wasn't going out with friends. There was a point in time in my teenage years that I would get alcohol and I would drink myself to sleep in my room by myself. And I think to some degree, some of that behavior is normal for a teenager, but the ways that I was showing up for me was not normal. And I thought about unaliving myself more often than not. And my family recognized that I needed help, and I knew that I needed help, so I went and got help. And as I've done research on bipolar disorder, I've actually found research that has shown that there's a correlation between getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder and being diagnosed with depression as a teen, as an early adolescent. Bipolar symptoms tend to get worse as you age, so a lot of times it can show up as depression when you're a teen, and the manic phases or hypomanic phases aren't as noticeable because it's usually disguised as regular teen behavior, but underneath there's a lot more going on. So I was kind of a wild teen. I did have moments where I was reckless. I made decisions that I'm surprised I made it out alive. I was not smart with a lot of the decisions that I made, and I put myself in some really dangerous situations and compromised situations that I shouldn't have. And there were times that I would go out partying, and then there were times where like I said, I would lay in bed all weekend and I couldn't do anything. So there were still the ups and downs. And then in my early adulthood, there were times that it was almost like I would just wake up and just want to blow my life up. And I know that that sounds crazy, and I know for people who might be listening to this and they don't struggle with the same things, it's probably confusing, because it's like, why would you want to blow your life up? But it was almost like I couldn't sit still and I couldn't sit in safety, and I felt like I had to do something to feel something, and that's where the impulsivity comes in, where I just felt like I had to go out and do something reckless to feel life, to experience life. And there were times where I had a bigger appetite for making reckless decisions than others. And so in my early adulthood, there were months where I would be going out all the time. I would be traveling insane distances to go hang out with people that I had just met. I would go stay the night at people's houses that I barely knew. And then, it was always followed by this really deep depression of not even being able to get out of bed and go to work, and not being able to get my work done, and just hating myself. And there was always so much shame afterwards, after making decisions that I knew were not the best decisions. In the moment, I didn't think like, this is a bad decision. In the moment, I was just feeling like I was invigorated, like I had all this energy inside of me that I needed to get out. I had all this energy. I wanted to talk to people. I wanted to be social. I wanted to go out and party. I wanted to do all these things. And then I would feel so terrible after, and I would sink into this depression, and I would feel guilt for the decisions I made. I would feel shame for the decisions I made. I would look back and I would think to myself, why did I do that? And I was always having to, I guess, pick up the pieces and put them back together after blowing it up. So it was this constant cycle, and it almost fed each other. Like, each cycle fed the next cycle, that fed the next cycle, that fed the next cycle. And so I went to therapy on and off my whole life. I started going when I was like 15. I got diagnosed with depression. Later on, I got diagnosed with anxiety. And I saw a bunch of therapists because I moved around a lot as an early adult. And I would always get diagnosed with depression or anxiety or both, and it never felt like it explained everything. And I remember writing. I've always been into writing. I wouldn't call myself a writer, but I've been a writer my entire life. I even as a kid, I would write in my journals all the time, and it's just something that has allowed me to get out my feelings on paper and things that I have a hard time explaining. It's given me an outlet. I remember taking one of my writings to my therapist and trying to explain to her how I felt, and it almost came across as disingenuous, and I don't think that she fully believed what I had written down on paper. And she kind of undermined it a little bit, and that made me feel worse, because deep down I felt like there was something more and she wasn't listening. And so again, it was just depression or anxiety, or the big blanket diagnoses that everybody just throws out when they don't know what else is going on. So that was kind of early adulthood, and leading up to my bipolar diagnosis, I had a lot going on in my life at the time that I was actually diagnosed. So this was 2021. I was at an all-time low, and I was having a lot of thoughts about unaliving myself, and I had a plan, and I knew that I was going to do it. And for some reason, I chickened out, and I felt so terrible. It was definitely one of the lowest points of my life. And I have a daughter, and all I could think was, she's going to be better off without me. And thankfully, I had a really good friend at the time, and he said to me, Courtney, think about this. Imagine your daughter is 15, 16 years old, and she's struggling with her mental health the same way that you are. and you're not there to comfort her, and you're not there to give her advice on how to get through it, and you're not there. And it reframed it for me, because I was always under the mindset that she's going to be better off without me, that I'm going to make her life worse by staying in it. And when he said that, it just made me think, like, if she does end up struggling with the same things, I can help her and I can be there for her, and I know what it feels like. And I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have somebody that I could go to that knew how it felt. My family, I grew up in generations of not believing in mental health or mental illness and all of that. So I've definitely been kind of the outcast of my family in talking about mental health and mental illness. And so I didn't have anybody to go to, and that really changed my life. So I decided not to unalive myself, but I did decide to call somewhere and get help, because I knew it was serious and I knew I had to do something about it. So I called a hotline one night. I was sitting in my grandparents' driveway, and I called a hotline and I talked to somebody and I created a safety plan, and I had been through that stuff before. I knew what to expect, but this time he routed me to a short-term outpatient facility, and I was paired with this amazing therapist who changed my life. And I only got to have I think we only got like 12 or 16 sessions together, and because it was a short-term outpatient facility center, and I wish it wasn't. I wish that my time with her didn't have to come to an end, but it did. But she was the first one who listened, and she was the first one who wasn't afraid of what I had to say. And in the past, I was always afraid to tell my therapist the truth, because I was afraid it would scare them or intimidate them, or they would think I'm crazy, or they would judge me. And with her, it was just like, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid of anything I had to say. So for the first time in my life, I was honest. I was honest about everything I was experiencing. And so she initially diagnosed me with CPTSD, which is complex trauma. It's not recognized in the DSM, but it put a name to the things that I was experiencing, and it made me feel validated in that I knew that it wasn't just anxiety and depression. And so for a while, we talked about CPTSD, and it felt like it fit. I was having symptoms of, just rage and hypervigilance. Oh my goodness, hypervigilance, and paranoia, and like all these different things. And so we worked through the CPTSD symptoms, and then in the middle of our time together, it was like my mental health took a completely different turn. So I had originally started seeing her when I was having thoughts of unaliving myself, and I was struggling with depression, and I couldn't get out of bed, and I couldn't see an end in sight. And then all of a sudden there was a shift where I was going out all the time, and I was riding around by myself at night doing things I shouldn't have been doing, and I was just reckless. I was reckless with my money. My goodness, I was charging things to the credit cards and doing all the things that I shouldn't have been doing. And I remember sitting there with her one day, being brutally honest with her about things that I was doing. And I'm not really ready to share all of those details yet, but I was just making really poor choices. And I just remember sitting there, and she and I were talking, and she got really serious, and I could tell that she was thinking something. And she was like, I'm gonna update your diagnosis to bipolar disorder, bipolar 2 specifically. And it's weird because I didn't freak out, I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I just sat there, because in a way it reaffirmed something that I feel like I already knew deep down. I feel like I already knew that there was something more to it, and it made me feel validated, and it made me feel like I released something that I had been holding inside for a very long time. I felt relieved. And shortly after is when everything else started to kind of fall apart, because then I started second guessing everything. If I stayed up late one night, I was second guessing, am I being manic? If I laid in bed too long one morning, I was second guessing, am I in a depressive state? And I just did not understand enough about how the disorder showed up for me that I couldn't recognize what was a normal state versus a manic state versus hypomania versus depression. And I just second guessed everything. And it was such a confusing time for me, because it was almost like I was second guessing myself so much that it almost distorted my reality a little bit. I didn't know what was real. I didn't know what wasn't. And it was just a very weird time. But, slowly I started writing about it, and I just, I've seen a few different therapists since then. We've tried different medications, and today I finally feel like I'm at a point in my life where I know how it shows up. It has impacted my career, it has impacted my relationships, and it has not been easy. And at times I've been self-destructive. At times, I have made decisions that I'm not proud of. I have burned bridges. I have isolated myself. And those are all the consequences that I have to pay for having this illness. It just, people, if they don't see it, it's hard for people to believe that you're truly struggling with it. And I know for me, my husband, we actually just got married, so it's weird saying husband, but my husband, he has been so great, and he has healed so much of my inner stuff, like my inner childhood, and he is so patient and loving, and we have such a healthy relationship. And I think that part of the reason why I just feel so inspired to share this is because I have finally reached a point where I feel like I can live a somewhat normal life. I'm not saying it doesn't show up. I'm not saying I don't struggle with it. I'm not saying it doesn't. I mean, there's times where I feel like I'm never going to be able to live a normal life, and then there's other times where I feel like I can manage. And I think with the right therapist and the right medication and the right support system, that has helped me tremendously, and it's helped me function as a normal person. But it's been a journey, and I hope that I have the opportunity to talk about that more with more videos and on this channel, because I know that I'm not alone. If there's anything that I can say to anybody out there struggling, it's that I've had to learn. It's that do not box yourself into this diagnosis. Mental illness, in my opinion, is a spectrum. I think OCD overlaps with CPTSD, which overlaps with bipolar, which overlaps with depression and anxiety, and I think that all of them overlap and intertwine with one another. I think that our mental health system is sometimes broken because we do box ourselves in, and I think that instead of labeling ourselves, we need to focus on the symptoms. Instead of the label, we need to focus on the symptoms rather than the diagnosis, and we need to treat the person, not the disorder. There are days that I still struggle a lot, and there are plenty of times where I wake up and I don't know how I'm gonna get through the day. And then there are other days where I'm so grateful for everything I've been through, and I'm grateful that I've experienced it so that I can help other people who feel the same, and that I can help my daughter if she ever experiences the same things later on in life. And as hard as it's been, and it's not been easy, it has not been easy. My life, I have made my life 10 times harder because of how I've struggled and shown up with this illness. And it's so real. And I just wish that more people talked about it, because there's so many people out there that are struggling and they can't name it, and they don't have a support system, and they feel like they're crazy. I feel crazy all the time. But I just want you to know that if you're watching this and you've experienced any mental illness, whether it's bipolar or anything else, you are not alone. You're not crazy. You're not being dramatic. You are a normal human being with feelings, and maybe your brain is just a little bit more intricate than other people's brains, and it's a gift. There are positive things that have come out of this disorder, and I would say it's my creativity. I'm good at writing and painting and being creative, and I feel so deeply. I feel so deeply, so much more deeply than most people that I know. And it has its drawbacks, but experiencing the world so deeply is a gift. It really is a gift. And I'm sharing this now because I just feel like I need to get this out. I feel like this is the message that I need to get out. The hardest part about this illness is how much we beat ourselves up and how much we hate ourselves for the things that we do or the ways that we feel or the ways that our brains work. And there's a lot of times I wish I could just take my brain out and throw it on the ground and stomp on it because I hate it that much. And then there are other days I'm grateful for it. In conclusion, it's really a journey. It's not a destination. And I know that's kind of corny to say, but there is no destination when it comes to mental illness. It's really about showing up every day, day after day, even when you don't want to. So thanks for watching. Again, I hope that I can share more of my story. I have a lot to say, but for now, I'll close here. And until next time, bye.